Greetings and welcome to the Dr. J Vlog series. It is Friday, April 17th, 2025, and on Fridays we look into knowledge and science. So, in yesterday's vlog, I talked about achieving true freedom through commitment, at least amongst human beings. And again, I was talking about freedom in the broadest sense of that term. What about the issue of sexual freedom and monogamy? Well, that's obviously much more specific. And I'll be addressing that issue, at least in part, tomorrow. But for today, let's talk about other animals and sex and monogamy, animal monogamy, if you will. So, to clarify further, zoologists actually describe three different types of monogamy. There's genetic monogamy, which describes two animals who only reproduce with each other. Pretty straightforward. There's sexual monogamy, which again refers to sexual exclusivity. So basically, two animals are sexually monogamous if they only have sex with each other. And again, this is actually relatively rare in the animal kingdom. And then there's social monogamy. This refers to two animals that form a strong bond and, in a broad sense, kind of move through their lives together as partners. Not necessarily sexually exclusive as such, but the animals will tend to cohabitate. They'll rear their offspring together, share their food, and collaborate in a variety of different endeavors. The duration of the pairing in a socially monogamous relationship then will vary from species to species. In some cases, it can last most of the animal's adult lives. In others, they may only last for a particular mating season. And then there's an additional consideration that you might not typically think about when you're sitting around and thinking about animals having sex together. That sounds a bit strange. But animals can sometimes be monogamous by default rather than by choice, simply because they can't find another mate. Does that sound familiar to you? But this is referred to as facultative monogamy, and it typically occurs then in areas that have a low population density and typically limited resources. In contrast, there are some species who engage in obligate monogamy, meaning that both the mother and father are required, they're obligated, to raise the offspring. So the parents remain monogamous during their child-rearing periods out of necessity, and will continue no matter what the population or the availability of resources. Okay, now regardless of the type of monogamy, one fact truly stands out, as I've already hinted. In the animal kingdom, romantic exclusivity and sexual exclusivity are quite rare. Instead, most animals tend to have what we might describe as the Elon Musk gene or the Nick Cannon gene. And so, look that up if you don't know what I'm talking about. But generally speaking, we can narrow our focus to the commonly accepted definition of monogamy, a prolonged association and essentially exclusive mating relationship between one male and one female. Essentially exclusive implies that occasional covert matings can occur outside of the pair bond, what we would call cheating, but that doesn't necessarily negate the existence of monogamy as the dominant pattern. And so in nature, what we find is that true monogamy appears to be more of the exception rather than the rule. But there's considerable variation across species. So for example, scientists estimate that less than 5% of the roughly 5,000 different known mammal species practice any form of monogamy. So it's quite rare in that sense. And even while some pairs that might appear monogamous, genetic studies have found that many mammals are not strictly genetically monogamous. Now, in contrast, it's estimated that more than 90% of all bird species are at least socially monogamous. And that's probably, in my view, why we have this tendency to associate mating birds as strongly as we do with love, or we talk about lovebirds, that sort of thing, right? And we talk about birds and love all in many instances through our myths, through our lore, through different songs that we have. Think of all the birds that talk about snow white turtle doves, or bluebirds, or Fleetwood Mac's Songbird, which I fell in love with years ago. My first rock concert was Fleetwood Mac, and one of the encores was Christine McVie singing Songbird. That memory is etched in my mind forever. I fell in love with Christine McVie when she was singing that song. I was 16 years old, but hey, what are you going to do? Anyway, it's interesting then, if you look at maybe somewhat less romantic, but if we look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, many birds require biparental care and thus practice this obligate monogamy during childrearing. Now, I just want to consider one particular case in a little bit more greater detail because I find it fascinating, and that's the Atlantic puffins. You know about puffins? So they're amongst the most monogamous creatures in all of the animal kingdom, the Atlantic puffin. They're socially, genetically, and sexually monogamous. And in most cases, they're going to stay together as mates for the entirety of their lives. A female puffin only lays one egg each year. And then what happens is that she takes turns with her male partner to incubate that egg. And interestingly, although both members of the puffin couple end up migrating for thousands upon thousands of miles each year, they tend to do so separately, and then both return back to the same nest when the breeding season returns. And so I'm guessing there's a deep evolutionary secret here to their staying together, right, that we might learn from. They know they're going to be together every single year, but then they go their separate ways for the winter, and they actually spend most of their time at sea. They're well adapted to diving and catching fish. They're masters in that sense. They can drink seawater, and they're actually quite strong swimmers as well. But again, here's the key point. They usually spend as much as 8 months of each year apart from one another. So I'm thinking, how hard can it be to hang out with someone, share a, reproductive encounter, share some parenting or child rearing responsibilities for a few months, and then go your separate way for the next 8 months, right? So anyway, I guess that's why there are not a lot of romantic songs then necessarily focusing on puffins or puffin relationships as such, right? Chicago actually had a song from the early 1980s, Hard to Say I'm Sorry. And here's the opening line of that song. Do you remember this one? Everybody needs a little time away, I heard her say, from each other. Even lovers need a holiday, far away from each other. And it sounds a bit like puffins, doesn't it? Right? But again, I don't think they were talking about puffins in that particular song. But there are other songs about puffins. And so I just want to share a couple of these with you. Let me change up the view here. So there's a children's song here about puffins.
Puffin Island is in Elliston, and Elliston's in Newfoundland, and Newfoundland's in Canada. You can see the puffin there. Now the puffin is a cute little guy. He can walk, he can run, he can swim, he can fly. He's kind of friendly but mostly shy, the puffin of Newfoundland.
Okay, that's enough. That's all I can take of that one. But yeah, so that's a song about puffins, obviously. And here's another song that I find kind of interesting. And this is by Melinda. Hear her.
Gather round, friends, let me tell you a tale of a bird that has my devotion. Oh, they spend their days riding the waves of the North Atlantic Ocean. These birds are distinguished gentlemen, like many toucans in tuxedos. Call them clowns of the sea, or a sea parrot, they're my little fine feathered heroes. Oh, to be free like a bird of the sea, a being that soars above spray.
right. So there you go. I'll leave the link for that one in the description below. Melinda's interesting. She's a delightful young woman. She's a singer, obviously. She's a musician and an actress, and she creates music and tells stories about her life, and especially themes that afflict young people in this day and age. So yeah, she's pretty cool. Check her out. She's got a huge following. But okay, so apart from puffins, then, I'm always amazed to see Canadian geese pairing up as well, right? The goose and the gander, they typically mate to form a very strong pair. Often a long-term pair to a pairing to raise their children. They're the little geese, I guess they're known as goslings, or in Canada they're sometimes known as the Ryan gosling. But I digress. But Canadian geese raise their young in tightly defended nesting territories, and they typically then enjoy much better access to resources or more abundance as a result. So these places are selected very strategically as such, and everybody essentially benefits from the arrangement. In fact, there are such advantages to the whole mating process that Canadian geese will often go out and find a new mate if one happens to die, right? They want to continue their reproductive success and the lifestyles that they've grown accustomed to, as it were. And then there's the black vulture, right? Most are socially, genetically, and sexually monogamous as well, often staying with the same partner for several breeding seasons. But beware, that's not always the case. And the researchers have determined that in some cases, the black vulture in an existing partnership will in fact mate with somebody else outside of that partnership. And here's the catch. When that happens, the unfaithful vulture will then be attacked typically by their original partner, right? If there's evidence, should the original partner bear witness to the philandering. So in black vulture terminology, they refer to this as this type of comeuppance as the Carrie Underwood treatment. But beyond birds in general, there are also a range of other species across nature that are highly monogamous, including some mice, coyotes, lizards, and even cockroaches. There's one species of cockroach, the Salganea taiwanensis, that's, again, sexually, socially, and genetically monogamous. But there's kind of an interesting catch to this particular story. They're so monogamous that because after they find their mate, the roaches then spend the rest of their lives residing in a rotten wood habitat as such. And it basically doesn't give them any opportunities to find any other mates. So, okay, then what about then biological sex and monogamy? So the conventional wisdom highlights the importance of parental investments as dictating behavioral responses. And so in nature, the argument suggests that females have to invest more of their resources and reproductive fitness to ensure the procreation of their offspring, at least in comparison with males in most species. And so the argument then might suggest that females tend to be more monogamous than their male counterparts. But that's actually a myth. Both biological sexes actually display a variety of different mating habits and patterns. Now, I'm not going to prolong the vlog by discussing all the possible advantages and disadvantages across the many species, but I just want to cite one particular case that I find quite interesting, and that's the langur monkey of India. So Sarah Blaffer Hardy penned a fascinating book back in 1977, The Langurs of Abu, Female and Male Strategies for Reproduction. And what she discovered was that the females regularly initiate sex with males outside of their group, and they do so more often than necessary for breeding purposes. In effect, they're directly defying the dominant male monkey who seeks to defend his harem of females against rival males. So, what's the main reason then for the female promiscuity? She describes, or she found that, she found that there was a tendency of the dominant males to commit infanticide and kill the babies that weren't their own. And this was a common practice as such. And so in order, if that's left unchecked, then what's going to happen over time is that this constant process of infanticide is going to be highly detrimental to the longer monkeys and their long-term survival as a species. And so now what happens instead then is that the longer males are kind of easily deceived as such. So if a male has mated with a particular female, he'll spare her infant, of course, right? Even if she's a member of the breeding group that belonged to the male he's just deposed of, right? And so what happens is that polyandry then, or mating with multiple males, proves advantageous as a breeding strategy amongst the Langer females, okay? And so then by mating with as many extra group males as possible, female Langurs ensure their offspring against, or help protect them against, infanticide, should one of those other males eventually take over the group at a later date. So promiscuity then effectively serves as an efficient and powerful reproductive strategy amongst the Langurs, and actually amongst many other species as well. Female prairie dogs that mate with more than one male tend to have larger litters than those that mate with only one prairie dog, possibly because of the promiscuous females tend to be bigger, but nonetheless, we find that the litters are bigger if they mated with multiple males. And amongst certain polyandrous European sparrows, there seems to be a direct correlation between the amount of food that a male brings the chicks and the number of times that he's copulated with their mother. So yeah, who doesn't like a good provider? There are certain parallels in the human species as well, right? Humans, of course, are endlessly fascinating as a species. And in addition to the usual animal aspects of their sexual and reproductive behavior, there's a huge cultural component too that helps regulate our sexual behavior, and apparently much more so than every other species that we know of. And so that's what we're going to look at tomorrow. Okay? Sex among humans. And not just any sex, but sex between men and women. The old-fashioned heterosexual stuff. We'll talk about homosexuality and other forms of sexuality another day, but we're just talking about where our main focus here is on the reproductive aspect of the human condition, and how does sex factor into all of that. And again, really, we're just going to be looking at males and females, and how does gender affect our expressions of sexuality. Of course, it turns out a lot. And if you haven't noticed, there appear to be vast differences in terms of attitudes and often the behavioral practices of males and females in our species. Okay? But there are also some interesting similarities, too. So yes, tomorrow we're going to have the sex talk, however uncomfortable that may be. Actually, in truth, I don't recall ever having this sex talk with our 5 boys when they were growing up. I figured they could probably just Google whatever they needed to learn and get the information that way. Seems to have worked out well. Anyway, until then, may you and yours continue to create peace in your lives, nurture love in your hearts, and dole out hugs in abundance. And I hope I'll see you tomorrow.